name's Nick. I'll be doing the first half of the tour for you today. A little bit about myself. I'm actually still in high school. It's going to be my last year coming up. After that, I want to do two different things. One, I want to do mechanics, and after mechanics, I'm hoping to go to actual college to do economics. So the first building is the modern brick building behind the Riviera Beach, and that's the Lake Geneva Public Library. That Prairie-style building was designed by Mr. James Dresser, who was a student of the famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. The property along the shoreline is known as Library Park and was donated by Mrs. George Sturgis, or Mary, who was an early summer resident, who gave this lawn, along with the cottage that once stood here, to the city of Lake Geneva in 1894. Now that came with the stipulation that this property always be used as a public park, and their cottage served as the first city's library in the 1950s. During the tour today, we will be pointing out many interesting and beautiful homes and estates. Some of these are remnants of a bygone era here on Lake Geneva, an era of elegance when this area was referred to as the Newport of the West. This is in reference to Newport, Rhode Island, the summer resort on the East Coast. The time period we'll be referring to is roughly between 1870 and 1920, when the men who built these estates were at the forefront of Chicago's business and industry. The first large summer home built on the lake was called Maple Lawn, and it was built on the site in 1870 for Sheldon Sturgis. He and his brothers were business partners and each had summer homes in the area. That mansion was torn down over a decade ago and a new home was built in its place. Next to it is a large gray home called the Annex, which was built in later years to house the overflow of guests and servants. It's now called Acorn Manor. We are now passing a group of homes known as Geneva Manor subdivision. The manor was built on 37 acres of the Levi Z. Leiter estate, which is known as Linden Lodge, and that dated back to 1879. In 1867, he co-founded Field and Leiter Company, which is better known as Marshall Fields and Company. His fortune is, however, founded on real estate investments. The main mansion, which stood behind the subdivision's beach area, could take more than 30 rooms. Inside were 19 fireplaces, one even located in the master bathroom. Now, one unique thing to note about the Geneva Manor subdivision is that all the architectural features of these houses have to be different, and that is mandated by the subdivision covenant. house on the shoreline is one of the few remaining structures of a estate known as Snug Harbor. Snug Harbor was built in 1881 for Mr. and Mrs. George Sturgis, the same people who donated that library. The house had large French chateau homes with 15-foot ceilings on every floor, and it was located in the upper left of the boathouse and stood there until the 1957 when it was burned down. In 1919, Snug Harbor was purchased by John Gordon, famous Arctic explorer and member of the family that owned Gordon Dairy Products. In 1947, this estate became known as Covenant Harbor Bible Camp, owned and operated by the Evangelical Covenant Churches of America. Today, Covenant Harbor Bible Camp hosts many different youth, family, and gatherings throughout the year. Group of homes is the Geneva Bay Estates and is built on the former site of the large and beautiful estate known as the Butternuts. The home was built in 1874 for Nathaniel Kellogg Fairbanks, president of the N.K. Fairbanks Company and the leading manufacturer of lard oil, or soap. In 1875, it burned to the ground. Now, however, firemen, family, and servants were able to save a lot of the furnishings, and they actually were able to save the roof planks too. Now, undeterred, Mr. Fairbanks had work began that following Monday morning to rebuild his home from its original plans, and it stood there until 1955. In 1895, a 5-hole golf course was added to the estate grounds. It was here on Mr. Fairbanks' golf course that many of the millionaires living on the lake were introduced to the relatively new game of golf. We always get on this lake is, well, if I want to build a house on it, how do I do that? Best way to answer that is if you look at this first house for sale, basically what you have to do, looking at that house and looking at the one to the left, is you have to buy someone's house, tear it down, and rebuild your dream house, which would be the one to the left of it. So to do that, you have to pay for this house, pay for the destruction of it, and pay for a new house to be built on it. It's quite expensive. Now, until now, I have asked you to use your imagination to picture what a lot of these estates look like. However, for the next mile of shoreline, most of these properties remain relatively intact, hardly changed from when they were built in the heyday of the West and the Newport of the West period. The white home with the red roof and chimneys is typical of the homes built during the Lake Geneva Golden Era. Blacktop was built in 1881 for John T. Lester, who was a prominent member of the Chicago Board of Trade. In later years, this home was the summer residence of Montgomery Ward Thorne, a member of the family that founded the Montgomery Ward department stores. It's worth noting that the large homes on the North Shore typically had large screen verandas and windows because there was not air conditioning at the time they were built. They were built to take advantage of the prominent cool lake breezes in the summertime. Now, all of the next 6 estate properties are especially interesting as they are or currently were part of the Wrigley estate under William Philip Knight. At the time of PK's passing in 1977, the family interests included the Wrigley Chewing Gum Company, Chicago Cubs, Wrigley Field, Wrigley Building in downtown Chicago, significant real estate holdings in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, and most of Catalina Island off the southern coast of California. Now, the first home is called Northwood Side, and that's the one with the brick porch. And it was constructed in 1876 for General Henry Strong, president of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. In later years, it was owned by Olaf Nelson T. Vander, who was credited with numerous inventions. One of the ones that was most famous was the sanitary milk bottle cap, and if you know what that is, it was the cap stamped atop old glass milk bottles. Now that simple invention allowed Mr. T. Vander to retire here at the age of 26, a multi-millionaire. The next estate is called Hillcroft. The estate began in the 1880s as a small hunting lodge for architect Henry Lloyd Gay and was originally named Gay Lynn. From 1947 until 1966, Hillcroft, as it was renamed, served as P.K. Wrigley's summer residence and later his guest house. In the 1980s, when it was sold to the new owner, they had it torn down and built this beautiful home. It incorporates many of the architectural features of the original home, but that one's only 1/3 the size. The home is called Green Gables, and this was designed by P.K. Wrigley and was his main residence at the time of his passing. William Wrigley Jr., the founder of the Chewing Gum Company, purchased Green Gables in 1911. The original home was torn down in 1955, and this new one was completed in 1966. At the time, it was considered state-of-the-art as everything from the flagpole to drapery was controlled electronically. Looking at this next home, a lot of people think the Wrigleys toned it down quite a bit. That's actually not the case. That's only their pool house. The barn-shaped building with a gabled roof is the Wrigley Boathouse, and is part of the original Green Gables estate and is the winter quarters of the Wrigley boat fleet. The sprawling home is the newest of the Wrigley addition, and it was built in 2014 and is called Lakewood. That's also just rumored to be a guest house. The Brown Building is made up of a series of boathouses that was built in 1905 to house 4 steam yachts. The bay on the left was made into a private home. The boathouse property briefly interrupts the Wrigley estate at the shoreline, but it continues half a mile back with a Wrigley Arabian horse farm and polo field. As we round this small point of land, we will get a good view of Witchwood, the final home on the Wrigley complex. Witchwood was constructed in 1902 for Charles L. Hutchinson, who was the trustee and treasurer of the University of Chicago, and the founder of the Art Institute in Chicago. Originally, it was a rambling 3-story building with a definite English country influence. As the home was built, they tried to disturb as few trees as possible. Following his death in 1932, they deeded the property to be used to the University of Chicago as a study and retreat center for 25 years. It was sold in 1957, and Witchwood was sold to Clarence Mitchell, who had the top 2 floors removed. Now, the Wrigleys did not like that very much, so basically the next day when they saw that, they marched out to the front door, knocked on it, asked how much for the house, and bought it on the spot. Now that's still owned by the Wrigley family, and that completes the Wrigley estate, originally taking up about a mile of shoreline on the beautiful Lake Geneva. The white villa with the orange tile roof was first of several estates built in 1906. It was constructed for Edward F. Swift, son of Gustavo Swift, founder of the Swift Meatpacking Company, and it was established in 1885 and was the first meatpacking company in Chicago. This was known as Villa Hortensia, named for Edward's wife Hortense. More recently, it has been called Edgewood and is the summer home of a Chicago businessman. Now, many consider the next home to be the most beautiful on the lake, so it's one I'd recommend taking a picture of, and it is a stunning example of Georgian architecture. It was known as Wadsworth Hall when completed in 1906 for Norman W. Harris of the Harris and BMO Harris fame. The beautiful landscaping was designed by the Olmsted brothers, son of Frederick Law Olmsted, who was perhaps one of the most famous landscape architects in American history. In 1920, it was purchased by Walden W. Shaw, founder of the Yellow Taxi Cab Company in Chicago, and in the 1930s, it was owned by his son-in-law, Daniel F. Perkinson Jr., who was president of the Morton Salt Company. The estate remained in that family for about 80 years, and it was sold in 1999 to an investment advisor named Richard Driehaus. Now, he had the property restored in 1999, and as you can see, it's a fine example of historic preservation, and it's now known as Farnsworth Garden. Now, more towards the end of the month is what he's most famous for, and that's his birthday, because he loves celebrating that. He doesn't invite a lot, only about 1,200 people to his birthday party, and he always has really elaborate themes, one of my favorite being Route 66. He took his car collection, parked it on his front lawn, and not only that, he also got a brand new cherry red Corvette. Now, that seems a little odd, and that's not the oddest part. Everyone, when they went to it, everyone who got an invitation, had a key in the envelope. Now, if your key started up that car, I guess happy birthday to you, not him, because you get to drive that car home. Nestled back among the trees is appropriately called House in the Woods. It was completed in 1906 for Mr. A.C. Bartlett, a wholesale hardware distributor, today known as True Value. Because the contractor Richard Suter was busy building the large Swift and Harris homes at the time, special plans were made to complete this home on schedule. Mr. Suter went down to Delavan, Wisconsin, and borrowed a 3-ring circus tent from P.T.D. Barnum, who kept that circus there in the off-season. The tent was erected on site and heated through the construction to continue so it could continue through the dead of winter. This house had to be finished on time because it was to be a surprise birthday present for Mrs. Bartlett in the spring. Set above a flat lawn is an old mansion with a red roof and white columns known as Bonnie Bray. Bonnie Bray was made in 1881 for Judge Thomas F. Winthrop, named for his daughter Bonnie. In 1897, it was purchased by Mr. Martin A. Ryerson, and the Ryerson family was in the steel business and lumber business, and had a really good fortune of being one of the only lumber yards to survive the Great Chicago Fire. Through the years, the Ryersons were very generous supporters of many Chicago institutions, including the Art Institute, Field Columbian Museum of Natural History, and the University of Chicago. The Ryersons were also huge party hosts in their day, entertaining such guests as the Fords, Firestones, Rockefellers, and Thomas Edison. Now, he was also close friends with Claude Monet, the French Impressionist painter. So he is responsible for donating many of the paintings currently on display in the Art Institute of Chicago. Now, the Gray home, practically in the water, was originally a boathouse for the Bonnie Gray estate, and it was built before the turn of the 20th century to house their steam yacht, the Hathor. Now, as we go from North Shore to South Shore, I have the opportunity to share some facts about the lake. As near as geologists can tell, it was formed around 20,000 years ago as the last glacier scraped across North America. It's 7.5 miles long from east to west and 2 miles wide. There are over 20 miles of shoreline, and the surface area is 5,263 acres. It's the second deepest lake, spring-fed lake in Wisconsin, reaching a maximum depth of 142 feet, and the average depth is 61 feet. More than 90% of the lake is 10 feet deep. It's the fifth largest lake by acreage in the state, and the clear water from the lake comes from the many pure underground springs, as well as precipitation in the form of rain, snow, and runoff around the lake. The only outlet is the White River in the city of Lake Geneva that feeds into the Fox, then the Illinois, then the Mississippi. So water flowing in this lake eventually ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. So that will be it for my portion of the tour. I'm going to now hand it over to Molly, and she'll be able to take you back to the city of Lake Geneva.
Wisconsin-Madison. I'll be majoring in finance. This is my fourth summer here working with the cruise line. It's my third summer giving tours and mail jumping here. If you're unfamiliar with what that is, I'll talk about that a little later in our tour today. But we're going to pick up our tour here in the Narrows. And this is luckily nicknamed the Narrows because it is the narrowest part of the lake. It's just a half a mile from shore to shore. Now, as we get further into the Narrows, you may notice that this property is very low to that shoreline. And this low-lying property is protected from the expanding winter ice by gates and the outlet located back in the city of Lake Geneva. Late in the fall, they'll open that gate and lower this lake several inches to protect this shoreline from ice damage. This lake does freeze completely over the winter. Sometimes 2 to 3 feet of ice will cover the lake. It's not uncommon to see cars out here driving on the ice. Also, all of these piers must be removed during those winter months to prevent them from being destroyed by the powerful ice. And this is a multi-million-dollar industry out here on the lake, the removal and installation of the hundreds of docks each year. striped boat canopy. If you look closely on that pier, you might notice a mailbox sitting on that post. And that home is a part of our annual U.S. Mailboat Tour that runs every summer from June 15th to September 15th, 7 days a week at 10 o'clock every morning. Like I said, I am a mail jumper here at the cruise line. So basically what that entails, if you're unfamiliar with what that is, we sit out the front window of the U.S. Walworth. It's another boat in our tour fleet. We sit out that window and we jump out the window onto the pier. We sprint down the pier, put the mail in the mailbox, take that outgoing mail and put it in our teeth, and then we turn around and jump back on the boat, and that's all while the boat keeps moving past the pier. So it makes for a pretty interesting job. I'd like to think I'm a pretty experienced mail jumper by now with 3 years under my belt, but I have managed to fall in the lake 11 times, so I think that's actually the worst record here at the cruise line. But that is a great tour. It's historically narrated just like this one, so you get some great information about the beautiful homes you're seeing here today, along with some high quality entertainment. This group of homes surrounding that very large expansive lawn, that's known as the 700 Club because it takes about 700 people to mow their lawn. Just kidding. It's actually called the 700 Club because all of those homes share the same address of Pier 700 South Lake Shore Drive. This was once the site of the Allview Estate owned by the John B. Gromas family. The Gromas family once owned one of the largest distilleries in Chicago. Stone building on the bluff, that is the clubhouse of the Lake Geneva Country Club. Now we're actually looking at the back of the building because the front of that building faces one of the oldest 18-hole golf courses in the United States. It was established here in 1875. It makes it the oldest golf course in the Midwest, still in its original site. However, that is not the original clubhouse structure. The original was a wooden structure that burned in a 1915 fire. That is one of the reasons for the use of so much stone and concrete in the second building. The building was built with a front facing the golf course rather than the lake, so that there would be no mistake to the club's true purpose. I would like to play a little game out here at the cruise line called Count the Golfers. It doesn't look like there are, oh, actually there are some golf, wow, that is a rare occurrence, so we actually see golfers on the golf course. There's usually, this club is so exclusive, they limit their numbers to about only 200 members and their families. Some of these members have been with the club since its founding. Gray home we are approaching past the golf course. That actually has the distinction of resting on the only island out here on Geneva Lake. Duck Island, as it is known, that's the summer home of Mr. Henry Bates and his family. The island is connected to by means of a golf cart. Now, this entire corner of the lake was once a large marsh called the Lower Duck Hole by the early residents because of the many waterfowl that used to nest here. And we still do get a lot of waterfowl that nest here. They actually like to sit right behind Duck Island. You can see it's more of a marshy area back there. And we'll actually get a lot of ducks that like to swim and even fly closer to the boats than you think. Actually, I was on here with Emily last week, and we actually had a duck fly right through this open area, right upstairs. It flew over everyone's head. It actually landed on the bar, and it asked Emily for 2 sprites. And Emily, being fluent in duck, said, "Well, Mr. Duck, how are you going to pay for that?" And the duck just said, "Oh, just put it on my bill." Tough crowd. They only get worse, you guys, so just prepare yourself. At the end of that pier, you can see a large red and white boat. That is the Lynn Fireboat. It was put into service just a couple of years ago. Serves great purpose in keeping us safe out here on the lake. The Lynn Fireboat serves as a water ambulance, and it's actually able to pump water directly from the lake itself, and then it's able to shoot that water out of these water cannons up to a football field away. So it makes it a lot more effective in fighting those fires, both on the water and on the shoreline. This next group of homes with that small beach area, the slide and the high dive, that is the Lake Geneva Beach Association. That started out as a place to camp, but throughout the years that property was subdivided, more permanent structures were built. You'll see that long pier with the numerous boat slips. That's for those residents who live off the lake, but they still have lake access and the right to moor a boat. Green boat canopies. You'll see the Sea Lark, and that is a recreation of an 1890s lake yacht launched just a few years ago. To the left of the Sea Lark, you'll see a mint green home, which has the nickname Timeless. If you look closely enough, you'll notice that it has the only clock tower out here on Geneva Lake, and that clock face lights up at night. That white home with the trees in front, that's called the Allegheny, built in 1925 for L.E. Myers. This is now owned by the Steiberg family of Racine, Wisconsin. They have thoughtfully put that property into conservancy, which does reduce the saleable value of the estate, but prevents any future owner from being able to subdivide that land. This next large white home is one of my favorites. It's the one with the 6 pillars. It's known as Aloha Lodge. This was built here in 1900 for Tracy Drake. Mr. Drake and his brother John, they founded the Drake Hotel and the Blackstone Hotel and Theater in Chicago. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. And the Drakes actually lived here for over 35 years. However, they might not recognize their home as it looks today because the new owner has almost tripled the size of the original mansion, adding the 2 wings on either side of that center section with the 6 pillars. The estate was called Laura Moore, named for his wife Laura. Mr. Moore and his brother, they were business partners and financiers at the highest level in the world. You might recognize some of the companies they organized: the Diamond Match Company, the American Tin Plate Company, the American Can Company, the Rock Island Railroad, and the National Biscuit Company, better known today as Nabisco. Mr. Moore built his estate here in 1900 for approximately $3.5 million. That was at a time when the average wage was just a couple of dollars per week. At that time, the estate included 400 acres and more than 30 buildings, including a huge Elizabethan-style mansion. That mansion stood on the rise where that new log home now stands today, but it was torn down in 1984. In addition to the extensive stables, the estate also included a drive-through gate lodge with living quarters, a carriage house, a garage, a laundry building, 10 greenhouses, a large animal barn, 2 farm cottages, 3 chicken houses, and a partridge in a pear tree. Now we get a lot of oohs and ahs about these next 2 homes, that very large blue one and the brown one right next door. But unfortunately, there's not a lot I can tell you about these homes since they were built relatively recently. There's not a lot of historical significance behind these homes or the property they lie on. But one thing I would like to know about these owners is if they have a son or a grandson who might be free for dinner sometime. White home with a sloping roof, and that's been known as Fairlawn since it was built here in 1894 for the late Charles Wacker. Mr. Wacker was the president of the Chicago Planning Commission after the Chicago fire, and under his guidance, the very well-organized redevelopment of that city took place. His plans included the Outer Drive, Union Station, Soldier Field, the Shed Aquarium, and of course, the ingenious double-layered road named in his honor, Wacker Drive. Next door, we'll see an elegant Spanish-style home that is known as Casa del Sueño or Dream House. The original estate was known as Galewood. However, that burnt down in 1928, but was rebuilt here in 1930. You may have noticed their unique boathouse out front. It's made to look like an old lake steamer that has crashed into shore that is cleverly nicknamed the SS No-Go. For several years in the past, that was owned by Mr. and Mrs. William Bell, formerly of Chicago. Mr. Bell wrote, produced daytime TV dramas. 2 of his best known include the Emmy Award-winning series The Young and the Restless and The Bold and the Beautiful. Sitting up on that bluff, you'll see the Geneva Inn. The Geneva Inn is luxurious European-style bed and breakfast. The inn actually has a great restaurant. The restaurant itself has terrace seating so that all guests are able to get a great view of the lake as they dine. And with that, we are now crossing Buttons Bay. Buttons Bay is named for Alexander H. Button, a local horticulturist who had a home here for many years. Today, this is the site of the Bigfoot Beach State Park. It has about a fourth mile of sand beach and 266 acres of public picnic, camping, and park area that are all owned and operated by the state of Wisconsin. Bigfoot Beach State Park, and all of the land that extends out on us to the point we are approaching was once a part of the most unique estate ever built here at the lake. Mr. and Mrs. F.R. Chandler constructed Ceylon Court high overlooking the lake back in 1893. That building, which became their home, was brought to the United States by the government of Ceylon. That's now the island nation Sri Lanka. It was their contribution to the 1893 Columbian Exposition. Now, after the exposition closed, F.R. Chandler purchased that building, had it carefully dismantled, loaded onto 26 railroad boxcars, and then had it shipped out here to the lake where it was reassembled out onto the point we are approaching, and it stood there until 1958. Instead of the three very modern homes you'll see on the bluff ahead of us, I'm going to have to ask you to picture the most unique home on the lake, Ceylon Court. It was a replica of a Buddhist temple. That building was 4 stories tall, constructed of 19 different woods, all native to Ceylon. The exterior walls were varnished mahogany, and the octagonal pagoda-shaped roof was covered in bright orange tile, which made it a prominent landmark here for many years. Inside, there were over 60 hand-carved teakwood columns to support the unusual roof, and authentic Tibet lattice detail. Beds hung from chains in the ceilings to prevent snakes from crawling up the posts, which fortunately is not a problem here in Lake Geneva. But most incredible of all, the home was constructed without the use of a single nail or screw. Craftsmen used dovetail joints and long wooden pegs to hold the entire structure together. After undertaking that very extensive project, the Chandlers only lived here for about 6 years, sold it to Mr. and Mrs. John J. Mitchell. The Mitchells then handed it off to Frederick Layton Maytag of the well-known Maytag Washing Machine Company, and this point of land is still referred to as Maytag Point today. However, the Maytags did sell the estate in 1948 to a developer. That property was subdivided over the next 10 years. And in 1958, that developer actually auctioned off most of the furnishings in that home and then allowed the Lake Geneva Fire Department to use the home in a controlled burn to practice their firefighting skills. So that was kind of an unfortunate way to see that home go. But if you were interested in looking at some of the artifacts and original pictures of that home, they are on display today at the Geneva Lake Museum back in downtown Lake Geneva. This beautiful white home we are now passing is built on a corner of that old Maytag property. And this home was owned for several years by Mr. and Mrs. George Canellis. Mr. Canellis was the founder and former owner of Andy's Candies, internationally known manufacturers of that after-dinner and chocolate. If you've ever been to an Olive Garden restaurant, they like to pass those out at the end of the meals. Also, their daughter, Elaine Canellis, she was the first female nail jumper here at the cruise line, which I think is kind of cool because she paved the way for a lot of other female nail jumpers, including myself. So that's kind of cool. Behind that gazebo and small point that project out you'll see a townhouse development known as Somerset. That was built here in the late 1970s on the site of the Harry G. Selfridge estate called Harris Hall, dated back to 1899. The mansion that once stood here was a beautiful 3-story stone, half-timbered English Tudor manor. In the early days, Mr. Selfridge was a partner with Marshall Field, located in Chicago, but in his later years, he moved out to London, England, where he established Selfridge's department store, as well known in London as Marshall Field's is in Chicago. Mr. Selfridge had many groundbreaking ideas at his time, many of which are still used in retail business today. Things like annual sales, bargain basements, unique store layouts, and even the saying, "the customer is always right," that can all be credited back to Mr. Harry Selfridge. On the hill. That used to be a part of the estate of George Walker. He was one of the founders of Milwaukee. He called his estate Point Comfort. However, this area is now a condominium development called Vista del Lago that translates to view of the lake, which is pretty appropriate for if you look over your left shoulder and almost behind you, you can see nearly just 7 miles away down to the village of Montana. Now we are approaching the largest single-family home ever built here on the lake. Now you might not be able to see it yet, but I promise when you do, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about because it is an Italian-style palace. Now before I start with the history of this home, because there is a lot of it, before I start with the history, I'm actually going to clear up a few rumors about this home that you may or may not have heard. Number one, this was never the Wrigley Mansion. We pointed out on the North Shore what we like to call the Wrigley Mile. Number two, this was never Al Capone's hideout. We would like to think Al Capone would be a bit smarter and head out here in the largest home on the lake. Number three, this was never the Playboy Mansion. There was a Playboy Club here in Lake Geneva, but it was located on Highway 50 where the Grand Geneva now stands today. Now that we've cleared this up, we are approaching Stone Manor. It was originally called Younglands by its owner, Otto Young. He began building this in 1899. Although he was from a wealthy family in Germany, when Mr. Young came to the United States in the mid-1800s, he was virtually penniless. He actually started out by selling costume jewelry from a pushcart on the sidewalks in New York City. But during his lifetime, he obviously amassed a very sizable fortune for himself and his family. So how did he do it? Well, after the Chicago fire of 1871, he moved to the city of Chicago, where he invested every nickel he could scrape together in real estate under the burned out city. Now, many so-called experts at that time said that Chicago would never rebuild after the devastation of the fire. Otto Young wisely thought otherwise. Much of what he bought is known today as the Chicago Loop. A conservative estimate of his fortune said after his death in 1906 was set at over $25 million. Plans for his home had originally been more modest. A $150,000 budget was set, but as plans became more elaborate, that price skyrocketed closer to $2 million. Now that's extremely expensive today, but that was astronomical over 100 years ago. Now, as we get a better look at the home, it's 7 levels in all, 2 sub-basements, 4 main levels, and a rooftop terrace. Set off by a 250-foot wide veranda, the mansion stretches 174 feet as it faces the lake and it's 70 feet deep. The exterior walls are dressed Bedford limestone, the floors are hand-laid parquet tile, and the interior walls are Tennessee marble. When that home was completed in 1901, all the doorknobs, plumbing, and electrical fixtures were 14-karat gold plated with matching solid sterling silver on the second. Ceilings in the mansion are hand-carved out of mortar, lavishly decorated by imported European artists with breathtaking oil paintings. On the main floor is a beautiful ballroom complete with a crystal chandelier, huge mirrors, and an ornate pink marble fireplace. His hand-carved dining room table could seat over 100 of his closest friends. Also on the main floor was a parlor, library, music room, game room, butler's pantry, and a vast kitchen. Second and third levels, basically a bedroom and bedroom suites. Fourth floor doesn't have any windows facing us, but I promise you it's still there. Was originally designed for recreation, at one time contained a gymnasium and a miniature golf course. Originally, that rooftop was a garden, but that wasn't just any garden. They actually planted willow trees up there with the idea that the branches would beautifully cascade down the side of the building. But as trees do grow up, their roots do grow down. So that did cause severe structural damage to the top of the building, so they had to take those out. So what did they put up there instead but a rooftop swimming pool, which is set off by the guardrail on the upper right-hand side. Even the two-level basement was elaborate, including a 3-lane bowling alley, jewelry vault, huge laundry and drying rooms, and a mammoth cold storage room with a double boiler system. Lowest level was used for ice storage. In the winter, they would harvest large blocks of ice out of the lake and then store them for summer use as a permanent air conditioning system. Unfortunately, Mr. Young was only able to enjoy his home for about 5 years before his death, but the mansion remained in his family until 1939, when his granddaughter presented his home, about 8 acres of the surrounding land, to the Episcopal Church to be used as a private school for girls. Unfortunately, that school failed financially, and financial problems have followed this home ever since. In the 1960s, it hit rock bottom when it was taken over by Walworth County for back taxes. Tax auction was held. It was bought by a developer for just $75,000. Now, you may be thinking that you missed out on the deal of a lifetime, but I am here to reassure you that back then that home was in terrible condition. Since then, several $1 million have been spent in the restoration of the estate. 1970s, main floor is transformed into an elegant French restaurant known as Stone Manor Inn. That experienced financial problems and was forced to close. Next came the failed Christmas Tree Museum. And we're still scratching our heads as to why that one failed in the summer resort town of Lake Geneva. But most recently, that's actually been converted into a couple of luxury condominiums. Tina Trahan, she is the wife of the CEO of Stars Cable Network. She actually owns 6 of the 7 condominiums in that building, and she's been able to keep that running for a couple of years now, so we do think she has the right idea with this one. So that is the story of the largest single-family home ever built here at Geneva Lake, originally called Younglands, and today known as Stone Manor. This also concludes my portion of the tour, so I'm going to hand it up to Captain Keith. He's going to take us back to the city of Lake Geneva. I hope you enjoyed the tour. If you did, my name is Molly. If you didn't, it's Katie. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Molly. Like she said, as we head back in here, we're going to finish up the tour with some landmarks actually in the city of Lake Geneva. It's a place we haven't talked about yet. Directly ahead of us, just get a better view of this as we make our turn here. You'll see a big tan building. That is the 9-story Geneva Tower condominiums. This condo was finished in the 1970s, and when it was finished, a lot of people thought that it was kind of ugly, but it ruined the small town feel that Lake Geneva had. So a lot of people didn't want any more of these buildings being put up. So if you look off to the right of the 9-story condominium building there, the big tan one, you'll see a cluster of larger buildings. Those are all hotels. You got the Cove, Harbor Shore, and Bella Vista Suites. Not a single one of those hotels breaks the treatment. I know that after a while it's put in place, of course. In between those 3 hotels, you'll see a Victorian-looking home. It's a burgundy and olive green colored siding. This is the Baker House today, fine dining restaurant. Was the private residence of a guy named Robert Baker back in the 1800s. Businessman from the area. In between the hotels and the 9-story condominium building is Flatiron Park. where the majority of our large festivals are held here in the lake, including the Venetian Festival, the biggest one in the middle of August. Interesting feature of the shoreline there, if you look underneath the 9-story Geneva Tower condominiums, you'll see a very low-lying tan bridge. We get a better view as we head back towards the rib. But underneath that bridge is the one outlet here in the lake. About 8.2 million gallons of water flow into the White River. That should makes its way all the way down to the Mississippi River in Gulf of Mexico. And of course, the last building we'll talk about today is the beautiful Riviera Ballroom. It's a big brick building attached to the piers that we're returning to right now. Riviera is probably the most prominent landmark anywhere here on the lake. Opened up in the 1920s, very hopping spot back in its day. Changed quite a bit though. Today the lower level is kind of the touristy part of it. Out front you have the beautiful Riviera, found under the Treehouse family fountain. It's been renamed a couple of years ago. And then on the inside we have, of course, a bunch of souvenir shops. A little bite to eat down there. Restrooms as well. So check out the Riviera and its surroundings as you guys head out today. The upper level of the Riviera is a civic center, a wedding venue, probably the #1 wedding venue anywhere here on the lake. Some brides will put their weddings in over 2 years ahead of time, sometimes even before they're engaged, just to make sure they get the weekend that they want. So that's how popular of a location this building is. Now as we head back in here, just a couple of requests for you guys. First of all, please remain seated during the docking procedure. It is a little bit windy today, and if we did need to make our way out for a second landing, we just like that everyone makes sure that they remain in their seat for that entire thing. I'll come back over to the microphone, let you guys know when Nick and Molly have the boat all completely tied up, and then you're free to exit the boat at that time. If you guys see any trash around you, if you throw that in the waste bin on your way up, it makes our job a little bit easier. But more importantly, we don't want any of that flying into the lake before we get a chance to pick it up.